Okay, so this is video 2 for assignment for research methods, and we're looking at quantitative data analysis, and the information in this video will cover tasks 2 and 3 in your assignment brief. As you remember, quantitative data is all about numerical data analysis. So here's our unit specification. Now this information covers the whole process of data analysis, so more than just this video, but in this video we're looking at these two first stages: organising and displaying or presenting data. Again, all of this assignment is for a pass and a merit, and here's the scenario that you're familiar with by now, looking at fitness tests for our British gymnasts. So the whole picture, so the big picture, the stages of quantitative data analysis take us through 4 stages. So we're today looking at organising data and preparing it, displaying data, and eventually in videos that will follow we'll look at measures of central tendency and variability and data analysis, so some statistical tests. So here we have a visual version of our process or stages of quantitative data analysis. First, a very brief section looking at organising data, presenting data and how to appropriately include things like graphs and tables, and then moving on in later videos to these 2 stages to follow. Just so you know, this element, so measuring central tendency and variability, is commonly known as descriptive statistics, and this actual data analysis, so putting the information through some tests, is called inferential statistics. This is much more superficial and literally states what you have, and this sort of testing and this inferential statistics infers meaning or takes some meaning from the results. So, task 1, organising data. This really is incredibly simplistic. We're not going to do any amount of work on it other than to understand briefly what it is, and it essentially is a process of sorting out or organising or rearranging your data to make it usable, putting it in a format which is sensible and that you can access, because it could be that you're doing tests on 100 people and you obviously will have a lot of raw data, or doing multiple tests on 20 people, so that big volume of data needs to be organised and manipulated to make it a more accessible format. And these are the 4 sort of processes of possibly organising the data, which we'll look at in a moment. So range, rank order, simple and grouped frequency distribution. So, organising data. Number 1, range. So you may have come across this from your maths work. Range is basically the difference between the highest and the lowest numbers. So the highest number minus the lowest number gives you the range. It's a very superficial factor or process of organising the data. Rank ordering your data, so putting it in a certain order based on certain criteria that you have, highest to lower, or highest to shortest, tallest to shortest I should say. If you have less than or equal to 20 subjects, then you might use simple frequency distribution, so how many of that 20 fit a certain category. Or if there are more than 21, you would group the data, so between a certain height category, between 5'6" and 5'8", how many people fit that category. So it depends on the volume of information that you have. So all you'll need to do is to write about these 4 strategies for organising data in your assignment. And quickly popping to the assignment brief, this is obviously task 2, organising and presenting data. So if I scroll down here, you'll write your information for that part, stage 1, in this section here. So the second part of task 2 looks at presenting data. So this is the second stage out of the 4 stages of analysing quantitative data, and really this is important in terms of laying out your results and your findings in a very visible, accessible and appropriate format. a format that suits the data that you have. And mainly we'll be looking at tables, graphs and diagrams, but there's a particular sort of a checklist of things that you need to ensure that you think about when you're presenting your data. So obviously it needs to be the most appropriate. Is it best that your data is shown in a table or organised in a table, or via graphs or via diagrams? And depending on what you're looking at, one or multiple of those might be suitable. It's really important that you title your whatever you insert. If it's a graph, it needs to have a title with it. Too often in work I see, you know, images or tables or whatever it happens to be thrown in and it's kind of just there, so you must title it. If you've used somebody else's diagram, a secondary source, then you need to put a footnote to show the source of this information. And whatever you do, whatever information you put in, whatever it's a graph or a table, you need to reference it in the text in your write-up. As I said, if it's just thrown in there as a visual or as a filler, it has little worth at all. So you must reference it during your write-up of your experiments. And on a little bit more of a superficial, level, it's got to be neat and clear and well presented. It's got to be quite visual. So here's an example of a table that you might include. This is obviously secondary data. I've got this table from somewhere else, but it could be data that you've actually collected yourself, in which case you'd be making a table. What you can see is that it has a reference here, so table 1, or you might use figure 1. And here's the title of the table, so physiological characteristics of both sexes presented in values of mean and standard deviation table values. So it tells you what it is. We've got clearly presented the content of the table with the units of measurement, and that again is really important. I can't stress that enough. Again, sometimes you see numbers, but we don't know whether we're talking about, heart rate or whatever value, minutes or meters, whatever it happens to be. Down here then we've got a footnote to say sort of an additional bit of information that the author of this particular table felt it was important for you as a reader to know, and so that comes as a little footnote below the table. So we've got our reference, our title, our values and units clearly presented, and any footnotes that are appropriate and relevant. Those things I've picked out there in the green. Here's an example of a graph then. So I've added the reference. So figure 1, graph to show changes in heart rate in cross-country skiers with increased intensity. So if I was writing in my text, I might say the following results seen in figure 1 show that blah 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 blah, and I'd carry on discussing what I'd found. We've got 2 axes, both of which have been labelled and have the units associated with that axis. And it's all neatly and clearly presented with an appropriate scale on both axes to show the results. So again, title, labelled axes, and the citation here, so figure 1 to use in your text. Here's another example of a graph, slightly different version. We've got 3 components that are all shown on the same graph, and this allows nice comparison to be made between these different elements. So again, this would be a more appropriate graph if you wanted to show comparisons. Here's a different format, a line graph, which or a bar chart, which again allows comparisons between different components of a test. So resting heart rate after 30 seconds, heart rate after 60, and maximum heart rate. And you can see the changes and progress very visibly, in part because of the colour and in part because of the structure of the graph. And there is a video to help you know Excel and how best to choose graphs and charts within that, so that's worth having a look at. And lastly, here's a diagram that's been included to support one element of an assignment. Again, we've got our figure 1, which you would reference in your text write-up, and the title of the graph. And I would make sure that within the writing I explained this diagram, rather than just throwing it in there as a visual to fill or pack out my work. I need to show off that I get it. So we've covered in this video the first two stages of quantitative data analysis, how to organise data to make it usable or user-friendly, and how to present data, including all the little elements of, titling and referencing that you need to make sure that you've done.